It's All Things Considered, member-supported Hawaii Public Radio, and I'm Dave Lawrence. Thank you very much for joining us. We're in our HPR Atherton Performing Arts Studio. It is our fourth in-studio interview performance session with Jake Shimabukuro, who has returned as the release of another exciting record happens too, Nashville Sessions. We welcome him now. Aloha, mahalo, and thank you.
Aloha, thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure and honor to step foot in this studio, so thank you.
You are quite welcome. That's really cool. We've done these a number of times, and now we have a record, Nashville Sessions, first of all original material from the press inclusion, although the Byron Yasui piece was one of the really standout, exceptional things that's part of this too.
Yeah, definitely. The listeners may not have been aware, but last year, Dr. Byron Yasui, who was one of my mentors and my professor over at the University of Hawaii, well, basically everyone's professor, anyone who studied music in Hawaii had to get through Dr. Yasui to get their degree. So last year, Dr. Yasui composed the world's first contemporary classical piece for ukulele, and it was a concerto for ukulele and full orchestra, and we premiered it with the Hawaii Symphony under the direction of Joanne Falletta, Maestro Falletta, and I got to play the ukulele part, and it was just the highest honor. And I tell everyone it was the most challenging piece of music by far that I had ever encountered, but the most rewarding. And so one of the tracks on this new album is kind of a tribute to Dr. Yasui, where I actually took parts of the first movement of his concerto, and of course with his permission, and took parts of the first movement and just kind of reharmonized it and kind of put it in a little different context, so it still has a bit of his thing and a little bit of my thing. So
well, different context is a great way to just think about the whole thing. I mean, I was just listening to it. It's stunning for fans Jake has done a lot of different things in his career, but it puts you in a trio format in Nashville. There's a very electric, just drenched in effects sound to some of the songs. So when you say different context, everything Jake is almost in a different context.
Yeah, it's true. And the one thing that I wanted to, basically I've always been, I'm a fan of the ukulele first. I mean, that's the thing. I have such a respect for this instrument and all the players, that have elevated this instrument. Those are all my heroes and the people I grew up listening to, like Eddie Kamai, Otasan, the list, Peter Moon, Dr. Byron Yasui, Benny Chung, Gordon Mark. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Eddie Bush, So what I wanted to do was I wanted to go in a different direction, but at the same time be very careful of, not disrespecting the traditional sound of the instrument. And I've always been a huge fan of Kamaka ukuleles. I've had a long-standing relationship with them for decades now. I mean, my first ukulele was a Kamaka when I was 4 years old. So I checked with them to make sure that, that I was going to go in this direction, but I wanted to make sure they were okay with it, before I moved forward. But you're right. I did. I was very experimental with this record, used a lot more effects, kind of a lot of my rock guitar influence, like guys like Jeff Beck and Eddie Van Halen, Jimi Hendrix, guys like that really inspired me when I was a teenager. And I wasn't trying to mimic their sound or anything like that, but I think going back to the analog pedals and the amps and effects and all that allowed me to kind of step in different shoes in a way and become a different player, allow my other influences to kind of be expressed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that. And in different ways. It could be. It reminded me something of like a John Abercrombie sort of record.
Oh, thanks.
Because some of his trios have a sort of just a similar, like
very fusion, very spontaneous.
That's right.
That kind of energy. Yeah.
Right, and fusion bordering on rock, but definitely maintaining and McLaughlin. It sounded a little bit like John McLaughlin.
Oh man, wow, that's a really high honor. But thank you for saying that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, he's one of my heroes as well.
And then you can hear it in it. One listen to Nashville Sessions, and that'll come to mind. Some of the interesting, I was curious, like, there's Leslie speakers listed as some of the tools. I mean, he used a lot of vintage stuff. It makes me think of when we had Booker T in here, we had 2 Leslies. He wanted
nice.
not one, but a pair of them. The Rock-like distortion, the 2 preamps. Talk a little bit about both the cats who are working with you on it, but also utilizing some of these techniques.
Yeah. Well, so basically, we rented a studio in Nashville, and we rented it for 6 days. We went in with absolutely no music prepared. The idea was just to go in there and just jam, see what happens, be very spontaneous, open-minded. So when we walked into the studio, they had all those things available. I mean, they had these great analog tube preamps. They had these, they had a real plate reverb, not like, it wasn't software, or computer. It was, an actual, they had a room with these, I think they call them like EMT plates, and, and they would run the sound through them. That's what would create that effect, so, I mean, it was incredible, the Leslie speakers, just all of the different equipment that they had in there, we just, I just had all these. Let's use them all and try them and see what happened. So it was a great experiment. And I worked with like here, working with Milan Bertosa over the years. He's such an experienced engineer. Working with players like Noel Okimoto and Dean Taba. Steve Jones. Over the years, it was. I think all of those experiences. Helped me in so many ways and inspired me, to kind of push myself, because every time I play with those guys or work with those guys, they're always challenging me to
take it to another level.
Yeah, to just keep going and keep going. And that's kind of how I really felt, with this record. This was the first time that I was kind of taken out of Hawaii, right. Put in a completely new environment with new people.
Nashville people.
Yeah, and just kind of take all the things that I've learned here and apply it in a completely different, setting and in a new context, and just get this, just be influenced by these other things, people that have different backgrounds and different, styles of playing and of recording and all that. So it was a tremendous learning experience for me.
Who are the 2 cats that?
So Nolan Werner is and Evan Hutchings. Nolan Werner played bass on it, and Evan Hutchings played drums and percussion. And they're both Nashville studio session players. So all they do all day is they're in the studio and they just play. Different artists just come through, right. And they're given charts and they just play, and that's all they do. And so for me, being in the studio with musicians like that who basically live in the studio, right. And for me, I've never been a studio musician. I've never been one that's comfortable, in front of microphones. And, and you can ask anyone that I've ever worked with in the studio, I'm always as nervous as, I'm just like, it's my first time whenever I'm in there. So, but luckily I've always had good people, who could help me and steer me in the right direction and give me great advice. So, so this was really scary for me, but at the same time, it helped me to it motivated me or inspired me to kind of step forward a bit, and kind of put me in a position of almost like a band leader, because for studio musicians, they're there and they're waiting to get some direction,
right, from you.
Right. But like normally when I work with my musician buddies in Hawaii, they're always, contributing and say, oh, well, let's try this. Even when I work with Milan, like everybody that I work with, they take a little bit more of a producer's role in the sense where they're feeding me information and we're all kind of collaborating, But in this scenario, it was kind of like people were looking at me or the co-producer who was R.S. Field. He was a co-producer. So they're looking at us and kind of, what are we going to do? Right. So it was a completely different experience. But I think the chemistry of everyone, working together was so nice. There was no egos. And I think that after a while, everyone just kind of realized like, hey man, we're just gonna have fun and make music, and that's what happened.
There's some shredding on there. You'd think he had like a Les Paul or a Gibson XG or something in his hand, the sounds that you make. And it made me wonder, I was thinking about today, I was like, now, what is he going to want to do from that? Or in general, you're holding the instrument you're so well known for. What would you like to interpret from it? Or it doesn't lend itself to...
Well, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. This was definitely more of a band project, rather than like my own solo project. Right. And I think in the arrangements and in the songs, though they're original songs, a lot of these pieces don't translate well. Well, I gotta figure. I guess I gotta.
You gotta learn how to do
sit
it.
and figure out how to make it translate as a solo ukulele piece. But they're definitely more of a duo or trio. Like ensemble pieces. And where everybody has parts, and and there's this incredible energy that everyone plays off of.
And tasteful use of the technology, the noises, the sounds. It makes like almost an electric wind. I wrote behind some of it. Man of Mud is one where it's just raging guitar.
Yeah, well, Man of Mud, is interesting because that was the first time that I ran my baritone ukulele through a distortion pedal and overdriven amp, and the sound was so big and
huge.
Just. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, man, the baritone ukulele has been around forever. And the baritone that I used on this album was an old vintage Kamaka baritone that was made in the 50s. And I plugged that thing into the amp, and I played one chord on it, and I was like, whoa.
Was it a Marshall stack?
And that's what inspired. Like. Yeah, and that's what inspired, the piece. It was and the song title Man of Mud actually came from my son. When he was 2 years old, he kind of wrote this song on the ukulele, and he called it Man of Mud. He was only 2, but he'd kind of like strum it, and he'd be like, the Man of Mud, the Man of Mud. He'd kind of do that. And I always thought, man, that would be such a cool song title for a rock tune. So when I wrote this song, I called up my son. I was like, hey, Chase, I just wrote this. I just, recorded this song. And I think your title, Man of Mud, would be perfect for it. Do you think I could borrow it? Yeah. And he was like, yeah, sure, Dad. Yeah, so.
I'll have my manager contact you. Yeah, we'll work out the deal.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, he doesn't know anything about royalties yet, so we'll see.
Is that so? What do you think? What's one that you tried? Because when you get on the big mainland tour and they're taking you to radio stations, you're going to have to figure out how.
Yeah. So on my tour, I have my bass player with me, Nolan, who was who played on the record. So we actually worked up most of the tunes as ukulele and bass duets, and it's pretty cool, because I feel like the energy's still there. It allows us to do more on our instruments, because there are less things. So I do more percussive things on the ukulele because there's no drums, and and he'll do a little bit. He'll get a little more busy on the bass, because there's more room for stuff. And I think it's interesting. And to me, like musically, I don't feel like we're compromising anything. I feel like all the parts are still there. The energy's still there, and the pieces still translate, well as a bass and ukulele piece. But yeah, for solo ukulele, I've dabbled around with some of the pieces. There's a few that, I can definitely, perform it as a solo uke piece because I kind of wrote them as solo uke pieces. But yeah, for some of them, especially the driving stuff or the real heavy distorted stuff, it helps to have that rhythm section bed, there for me to kind of lay my things over.
Yeah, there were some of those moments that it really had. One I was very curious about on Celtic Tune, background sound. Is that a violin or what?
Yeah, so it's so we had a string player come in, okay. And after we had recorded, come in and just layer some strings over it, and it's funny because that Celtic Tune, when I first got the idea for it, I was thinking of I was listening to Jack White, and that song, we're gonna be friends.
I probably know it without.
Yeah, it's like everyone was using it for their graduation songs. Okay. It kind of starts off with da 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 da. Something tells me we are gonna be friends. Right. So so I kind of got the idea for the song, by listening to that. I just thought, oh, that'd be such a cool, just kind of starting with just something as simple as just two strings, and then what I did was I just, so basically I was just thinking like, well, for those of you that, I just kind of the music side of me, but just kind of applying like a C mixolydian thing over, so it sounds, that kind of sound. So I just kind of had fun with it and started playing this. And then the second part of it, I thought, okay, well, so I'm taking this very mixolydian sound approach. Then the second one, I thought, okay, well, let me try like a C Lydian kind of sound. So it would be more like. So now I got this. So I was thinking of all the different things that I can do, over just this sustaining, this ostinato, between the C and the G. And then the third time, then it goes into like more of a C whole tone. So now you got the mixolydian. And then you got the Lydian sound. And then you got the whole tone sound. So you got all these three different sounds, and then at the end, I thought, well, another cool thing that you can do with the C is the A flat chord. So at the end, the A flat chord comes in, and it's like this. So you get all these different elements, but the whole idea was just C, because on ukulele, C is the first chord you learn. C is the lowest note on the ukulele, and it's kind of like the most basic, the most basic, the first thing you learn,
starting
right?
point.
Yeah. And so I just thought, well, what can I do, with that C? And so that was just kind of an experiment, and just kind of having fun with all the different things that you can play over that. Of course, there's a million more things that you can do over it, but the song.
But it has that really experimental sound throughout it.
Yeah.
6/8. It was like the soloing. You mentioned it earlier. It gives you a chance to do some of that metal like shredding.
Yeah.
But using this, I mean, it's ook on all of it, huh? No matter how much it sounds like a Les Paul or a Gibson. I mean, it's this.
Yeah, and one of the things I also did with this album too is I experimented with a lot of different ukuleles. So. I took all kamakas, of course, so I had my kamaka baritone, I had my kamaka tenor, and I also incorporated for the first time a kamaka soprano ukulele. And so like some of the songs, especially like Celtic Tune and Tritone, when you hear the really high-pitched instrument that almost sounds like a hammered dulcimer, it's actually the standard, the soprano ukulele, the standard size, the tiny one. Right. And what I did was I just tuned it up a little higher. Huh. And then and I used a capo in some parts, so I could get that really high sound, it almost sounds like a hammered dulcimer in parts. And then the baritone is so cool, man, because the baritone, when you play it like through an amp or through some kind of like a slight overdrive or something, and you play it, man, you can get like a oud sound, So there's a song on the album called F minor that, there's a section where you hear this lick come. that sound, and I play it on the baritone, and when you listen to it, man, it sounds like an oud, and it just really tripped me out because I've been aware of these of the other the other family members
Right.
in the
That's a good way of putting it.
but I never really, I think, exploited all the different
Incorporated it
tonalities,
into what you were doing.
the different timbres, and until this album I never truly had an appreciation for all these other for the different sizes of ukuleles.
Right. And the flavors that they'll bring.
Yeah, exactly. Because even though the standard, concert, and tenor are all tuned alike, they're all tuned exactly the same. They have very different tonal properties, right? So, and when you hear them all together, it's like this big sound. I mean,
Right.
it's just this huge sound.
That's the thing about the album. I mean, it's a real crossover point for you too. So when you talk about putting you in a new context, and it's not just opening you up to people who may be more familiar with a jazz or rock thing, or even a guitar thing, because it's going to be the kind of album that could appeal to guitar people.
Yeah.
It has that kind of feel, just from a quick listen. But beyond that, it's the kind of album that is just going to take you into these other. I don't know if we want to call them ethnic, but the way you were talking about the oud and also like Motown, for example.
Yeah.
And that has like such a blues resonance. There's a couple
Yeah.
tunes that have that kind of feel.
Yeah, Motown is kind of cool because it's something that the three of us wrote together, the drummer, bassist, and myself, and we all have such different backgrounds, right? So it starts off with this very kind of a... And rhythmically, it's doesn't sound like it's hard, but it's kind of a tricky rhythm. It's like it's a 4-3-4-2. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2. So that's the rhythm. And then when it goes into the second section, it kind of goes into these really cool like these jazz, more like jazz voicings. And that's more kind of like a lot of different influences for me were like guys like Ota-san, Eddie Kamai, recently Benny Chong, Dr. Yasui has always been a huge influence, Peter Moon. These are all like the kinds of things that they would do on the ukulele. You always hear these that kind of stuff. So I kind of wanted to bring some of that out, and I played it on the baritone, and it's just such a different I don't know, it just different vibe, and then it goes into like this very Santana, like kind of with the timbales, right, and the electric ukulele sound, and then toward the end it goes into this that's a very when I came up with that line, I immediately thought of when I was on tour with Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, because that's the kind of stuff they come up with. This very reminded me of this this tour that we did, and they had just a very sinister, sound quality to it. And, it was just, I really feel like this new album, I was able to just truly, showcase all of the different influences, all the people who inspired me over the years, not just the rock side but a lot of the local musicians.
Yeah, because it's very faithful to that too. And you've mixed the two together in many cases, where you'll keep that kind of traditional sort of ukulele sound, but mixed in with the leads that one would think that it was a guitar. Was it a Marshall that you used for the?
It was a combination of different stuff. Okay. Mainly the Fender, like a Fender Twin, kind of for the clean stuff, and then I would dirty it up with some kind of with some kind of pedal, Yeah, or just
Amazing to hear that. But as you just said, it does. You maintain it because throughout a lot of those more experimental numbers, I got the feel like, wow, there's still Jake in there with the traditional sound. But it'll be challenging for some of your long-term fans.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is like, you know, for ukulele players, they'll recognize it right away. But, you know, but there are like, you know, there are definitely references to like Troy Fernandez, who was a huge influence, you know, for me from Kyle Crater Boys. You know, he was, you know, he kind of, everybody knew him for this pick pull tap technique is what I used to call it. But it was, he would pick a string, then pull it off with his left hand, and then he would tap the top string. So he'd get this. You know, that was one of the techniques that he would use. So in the opening song, you know, I kind of, as a tribute to Troy Fernandez, you know, I took that technique, and it's a song called Hemiola Blues.
Right.
And it's just basically, it's Troy Fernandez's pick, pull, tap technique, but just applied in a different way, you know. There was also in the tritone piece, you know, which was actually more of Dr. Yasui's, you know, concerto. There's also a piece in there because it's called tritone because the concerto was based on, well, I mean, it utilized the two very dissonant intervals. One was a tritone, which sounds like this, and then the minor second, which sounds like this, right? So when I was working on trying to write something around his concerto, around the ukulele part of the first movement, another one of my heroes was, you know, the late Chino Montero, who is a great string player, singer, you know, I mean, everything. And he was one of my heroes, a great ukulele player, and he loved the sound of the tritone. I mean, the tritone interval was one of his favorite things, and one of his famous licks was this lick. You know, he would
love that dissonant kind of sound.
He would always play that. And, you know, he could be taking a solo in like, you know, something like a Hawaiian tune, and he would be playing something, and then all of a sudden he'd throw, you know, he would throw that in, right?
I would hear that.
Yeah. So what I did was I took that same idea, you know, that Chino would always play, but what I did was reverse it. Instead of playing, I played just more of a descending sound, and that's what became the opening lick to Dr. Yasui's tritone piece. You know, so it was just, you know, I feel like there's so many like for me it's kind of neat and very personal, because there are all these things in it that have some special meaning to me,
personal
you know,
connections.
yeah,
and then you could hear that going through the whole album. I mean,